The transmission arrived during the final rotation of the Council's deliberation cycle. 12 species, 73 worlds, 6,000 years of accumulated wisdom and power, all concentrated in that vast chamber aboard the Heart of Assembly, the mobile station that served as the seat of galactic governance. The Cathari ambassador, a creature of elegant segmented limbs and shimmering carapace, had spent the last 3 cycles arguing for a measured approach. The Vorkath representative, Commander Thalrex, had advocated for immediate force. The human delegation had been excluded from this session. That was standard procedure when dealing with newly contacted species who had not yet earned the privilege of full participation. The Council had reviewed humanity's records, their history of tribal conflict, their devastating world wars, their nuclear brinkmanship. The assessment had been unanimous, dangerous but primitive, capable of harming themselves but not a serious threat to established powers. The demand was crafted with precision. Earth would surrender all FTL-capable vessels. Earth would accept Council oversight of all military installations. Earth would acknowledge the authority of the Council in all matters of interstellar policy. The alternative was not stated explicitly. It didn't need to be. In the history of Council expansion, no species had ever refused this invitation to join the community of civilized worlds. Ambassador Zorak of the Hethnar read the formal declaration into the record, his voice modulated to convey appropriate gravity. The chamber fell silent as the transmission was dispatched across the light years to the human homeworld. The response came 43 standard hours later. It began with static, the unavoidable interference of interstellar communication. Then the image resolved, a human male, middle-aged by their species' reckoning, with close-cropped dark hair and eyes that held no fear. He wore a dark uniform adorned with silver insignia. Behind him, the bridge of a warship hummed with activity. "To the Galactic Council," the human said, his voice calm and measured. "This is Admiral Vance, commanding officer of the Terran fleet. We have received your demand." He paused. The silence stretched. Several council members exchanged glances. This was not the response they expected. They had anticipated pleas for mercy, offers of negotiation, perhaps even threats delivered with bravado born of ignorance. "We have considered your terms," Vance continued. "We have weighed them against our history, our values, and our duty to the 8 billion humans who call Earth home. We have studied your species, your technologies, your military capabilities. You have ships that are faster than ours. You have weapons that are more sophisticated. You have numbers that dwarf our defensive forces." He leaned forward slightly. "You have made one critical error in your assessment of humanity." Another pause. The council chamber had gone very still. "You assumed we would be afraid." Vance straightened. "We are not afraid. We are not intimidated. We are not interested in your protection or your oversight or your generous invitation to become a client species in your galactic empire. Earth has faced extinction before from our own weapons, from our own greed, from our own hatred. We survived. We learned. We grew." His eyes hardened. "So here is our response to your demand for surrender." He spoke 3 words. 3 words that would echo through council chambers across the galaxy for generations. "Bring your war." The transmission ended. Commander Thalrex rose from his position, his massive frame blocking the ambient light from the chamber's central column. His species, the Vorkath, had been the architects of council military doctrine for 8 centuries. They understood warfare as a mathematical problem, resource allocation, force projection, acceptable casualty ratios. "This is a bluster response," Thalrex declared. "The humans are attempting to project strength they do not possess. Their history shows a species that has never encountered an external threat. They have no experience with interstellar combat. Their technology is primitive by our standards." Ambassador Zorak remained still, his sensory organs processing the image that still hovered in the chamber's display field. There was something about the human's expression that troubled him. Not anger, not desperation, something else entirely. I recommend an immediate punitive expedition, Thalrex continued. A demonstration of force that will compel compliance. The Council's authority cannot be questioned by a species that has only recently discovered FTL travel. This is an opportunity to establish clear hierarchy. The vote was called. The expedition was approved. The Vengeance fleet, containing 800 warships and 3,000 ground assault vessels, was mobilized with remarkable speed. What the Council did not know, what they could not know, was that Admiral Vance had anticipated this response with the cold precision that humans called strategy and their enemies called terrifying prescience. Across the Sol system, Terran warships were already moving into positions that made no tactical sense to Council sensors. Defensive arrays were being deployed in patterns that seemed random, but were, in fact, mathematically perfect kill zones. Ground forces on Earth, Mars, and the outer colonies were mobilizing with a speed that only a species accustomed to internal conflict could achieve. The humans had been preparing for this moment for decades, not for the Council specifically. They had not known what form the threat would take. They had simply built their military capacity with one driving principle: never again would humanity be vulnerable to annihilation. The fleet that had defeated the last of Earth's internal tyrannies was already obsolete. The fleet that would face the Council had been designed for an enemy far more dangerous than any human adversary. In the void between stars, the Council's expeditionary force began its transit through the Gate network, heading toward the Proxima system, the gateway to human space. And in the darkness, human warships waited. The Vorkath had perfected the art of war through centuries of conflict with species whose technologies and tactics varied wildly. They had conquered the aggressive Xylos, pacified the expansionist Drakthul, and absorbed the scientific knowledge of the Hethnar. Their tactical database contained more than 30,000 recorded engagements against intelligent opposition. Nothing in that database prepared them for humanity. Commander Thalrex studied the tactical displays on the Vengeance's bridge, his multiple eyes processing data streams that would overwhelm most species. The human fleet had finally been located. There were approximately 200 vessels, a fraction of the Council's expeditionary force. Their hull designs were crude, their weapon systems apparently conventional, their power signatures modest. A defensive formation, Thalrex observed. They intend to make a stand at the Proxima Gate. His tactical officers confirmed the assessment. The humans had arranged their ships in a hemisphere pattern, protecting the gate entrance while maintaining fields of fire across all approach vectors. It was a standard defensive posture, one that had been used by dozens of species throughout Council history. The response was equally standard: overwhelm the defenders with superior numbers, accept acceptable casualties, force surrender. Signal the fleet, Thalrex ordered. Full attack formation. Concentrate on the center of their line. We will break through and seize the gate, then proceed to Earth. The Council ships advanced, their weapons charged, their fighters launched in elegant swarming patterns that had slaughtered more advanced opponents than humanity could imagine. And then the humans did something that made no sense. The human fleet broke formation. Not in disarray, there was no panic in their maneuver. They simply abandoned their defensive posture and accelerated toward the Council fleet in a wild, chaotic charge. Ships separated into small groups, each one following a different trajectory. Some headed directly for the enemy center. Others veered off at extreme angles. A few actually turned and seemed to flee. Thalrex's tactical algorithm struggled to process the pattern. There was no pattern. The humans were attacking with no discernible coordination, no obvious chain of command, no recognizable doctrine. "This is madness," his executive officer reported. "They have no chance of penetrating our formation. They will be destroyed in detail." But the human ships were not attempting to penetrate the formation. They were not trying to engage the Council's main force. Instead, they were maneuvering toward the support vessels, the supply ships, the troop transports. the medical facilities, that trailed behind the combat fleet. Sensors confirm, a tactical officer reported. The human ships are targeting our logistics train. They are ignoring our combat vessels. Thalrex felt the first stirring of concern. The humans had identified the expedition's weakness with disturbing accuracy. A fleet of warships could survive for limited periods without resupply, but the ground forces, the planetary assault elements, the long-term occupation components, they required constant support. Protect the supply vessels, Thalrex ordered. Redirect our screening elements to. The human ships were already among the support fleet. They moved with reckless speed, firing weapons that the Council's sensors had underestimated. Their missiles were simple in design, explosive warheads with limited guidance, but they were deployed in staggering numbers. Each human vessel carried racks of them, hundreds of projectiles that filled the void between the combatants. The supply ships were not designed for combat. Their defensive shields could withstand minor impacts but not the sustained barrage the humans delivered. Explosions bloomed across the Council's rear formation. Troop transports vented atmosphere. A supply depot ship, carrying fuel for the expedition's smaller craft, detonated in a flash that overwhelmed sensors across the battle space. How? Thalrex demanded. How do they have this many weapons? Their ships are too small to carry sufficient ordnance for this attack. The answer came from his tactical analysts. The humans had stripped their ships of conventional armor and defensive systems. They had converted every available space to weapons storage and launch tubes. Their vessels were fragile. A single well-placed shot could disable them. But they had traded defense for offense on a scale that no Council species would have considered. These are not warships, Thalrex breathed. These are weapons platforms. They are sacrificing survivability for attack capacity. The human vessels paid for their aggression. Council warships, responding to the threat, engaged the raiders with precise fire. Human ships exploded, crews dying in the void. But each destroyed vessel had already launched its payload, missiles that continued toward their targets, programmed to seek out the most vulnerable elements of the Council formation. When the engagement ended, a quarter of the expedition's support capacity had been destroyed. 23 human ships had been lost. The Council's combat vessels remained largely intact, their firepower undiminished. But Thalrex understood, with growing unease, that the humans had not been trying to win the battle. They had been sending a message. The Council could defeat humanity in open combat. They could destroy Earth's defensive fleets and bomb the homeworld into submission. But the cost would be staggering. Every step of the invasion would be contested. Every supply line would be threatened. Every planet would become a battleground. The humans were demonstrating their willingness to accept losses that no Council species would tolerate. "Commander," his executive officer reported, "we have detected additional human vessels approaching from the outer system. Their numbers are difficult to determine. They appear to be using some form of signal masking that confuses our sensors." Thalrex turned to the display. The human fleet was not 200 vessels. It was 2,000. The ships that had engaged the Council's expedition were merely the vanguard, the bait. And in the darkness behind them, the Terran fleet was deploying for war. Lieutenant Nora Chen pressed her face against the viewport of the Vengeance's observation deck and tried to understand what her tactical officers were telling her. The battle had changed. The human fleet was not retreating. They were forming a new line, not the hemisphere of the initial engagement, not the scattered raiding groups that had struck the supply train. Something different. "Admiral Vance has ordered a block formation," her executive officer reported. "The human ships are arranging themselves in a rectangular grid. They are advancing directly toward our center." Chen's sensory organs, specialized for detailed visual analysis, detected the pattern that her species' computers had missed. The humans were not advancing in a simple line. They were maintaining gaps between their ships, gaps that created overlapping fields of fire while minimizing the effects of area damage weapons. "These creatures," Chen whispered, "they have studied us. They know our weapon systems, they know our tactical doctrine." Her Vorkath commander had believed humanity was primitive. He had believed their history of internal conflict made them weak. But Chen was Sithari, a species that had evolved to detect patterns in chaos, to read the signs that others missed. And the pattern she was reading now made her blood chill. The human species had fought wars against each other for thousands of years. They had developed dozens of different tactical traditions, each one refined through conflict against opponents who shared their capabilities. They had created strategies specifically designed to defeat opponents who possessed similar weapons, similar defenses, similar technologies. And now they were applying those strategies against enemies they had never seen. "Commander," she called, her voice steady despite her fear, "the human formation is not designed for a direct engagement. It is designed to funnel our fleet into kill zones. They are trying to force us to commit to a single vector." Thalrex dismissed her concern. "The humans lack the firepower to destroy our capital ships. Even their largest vessels carry weapons that cannot penetrate our shields. We will." The first human weapons fire illuminated the darkness. Energy beams, focused and coherent, lanced across the void. They struck the forward elements of the Council formation and did nothing. The shields absorbed the impacts, dispersing the energy harmlessly. Thalrex nodded, satisfied that his assessment had been correct. Then the human formation opened fire with missiles. These were different from the earlier projectiles. These were larger, slower, but their warheads carried something that Council sensors could not identify. They struck the shields of the leading Vorkath vessels, and for the first time in the engagement, Chen saw something she had never witnessed in her military career. The shields flickered, then they failed. "You see," she said, pointing to the tactical display. "They targeted the exact spot where our shield generators project. They studied the frequencies. They identified the weakness. These missiles are calibrated to disrupt our defenses at the molecular level." Thalrex stared at the display, his multiple eyes reflecting the data streams. His confidence was cracking. "That is impossible. We have encountered more than 300 species. Not one has cracked our shield technology in less than a century of study. The humans have known we exist for 5 standard cycles." Chen understood now, understood what she had glimpsed in the human admiral's expression during the transmission. The arrogance of the Council had been their undoing. They had assumed humanity would be cowed by their power. They had assumed their technology was superior beyond challenge. They had assumed. They had assumed wrong. "Commander Thalrex," Chen said, "the humans are not trying to win this battle. They are trying to demonstrate their capability. They want us to understand what they can do. They want us to question whether victory is worth the cost." Thalrex turned to face her, his massive head tilting in a gesture of confusion. "What are you saying? You are suggesting we withdraw." "I am suggesting that we have made a catastrophic miscalculation," Chen replied. "We assumed humanity was a primitive species that had recently discovered advanced technology, but that is not their history. Their history is of a species that nearly destroyed itself with its own weapons and chose to survive anyway. Their history is of a species that turned its capacity for destruction into a tool of survival. Their history is..." The human fleet advanced. The Council's forward elements began to retreat, their shields failing, their crews panicking. Thalrex gave orders that seemed appropriate: reinforce the line, adjust shield frequencies, prepare for a counterattack. But Chen could already see the outcome. The humans were not going to be defeated by tactics designed for a different kind of enemy. "We cannot defeat them," Chen said quietly. "Not because they are more powerful, not because they are more advanced, but because they are willing to do what we cannot." "What is that?" Thalrex demanded. "They are willing to lose." The battle continued for another 2 hours. The Council fleet lost 47 capital ships and 112 support vessels. The humans lost 63 ships, a higher numerical total but a lower percentage of their fleet strength. They were winning the attrition battle. And in the distance, on the edge of the system, Chen's sensors detected something that made her throat tighten. More human ships, thousands of them, emerging from the darkness of interstellar space. Not defensive vessels, not raiders, not experimental prototypes. Warships, real warships designed for real combat, carrying weapons that made the earlier engagements look like skirmishes. They were still primitive in design, still less technically advanced than Council vessels, but there were enough of them to overwhelm any force the Council could deploy. "Commander," Chen said, her voice barely a whisper, "we have to retreat, we have to warn the Council, we have to." The human fleet engaged. The battle was short, brutal, and devastating. Thalrex gave the order to withdraw. The Council fleet jumped to FTL, leaving the Proxima system behind. Behind them, the human fleet did not pursue. They had made their point. The Council chamber had never been so silent. Thalrex stood in the center of the vast space, his body still bearing the marks of the battle, scorched plating, cracked sensory organs, visible fatigue. He had spent 3 standard cycles defending his actions, explaining his decisions, attempting to justify the expedition's failure. The other Council members listened with expressions that ranged from disbelief to horror to fury. "We underestimated them," Thalrex said finally. "That is the only explanation. We treated them as we would treat any newly contacted species. We assumed that their primitive technology and their history of internal conflict would make them easy to pacify. We were wrong." The Hethnar ambassador rose, his body language radiating tension. "You lost 1/3 of the expedition. You failed to achieve any strategic objective. And now the humans have demonstrated that they can resist our military power. What do you propose we do? Surrender to a species that has not yet developed the capacity to leave its own star system?" Thalrex shook his head. "No, we must adapt. We must study their tactics, their psychology, their weaknesses. They are not invincible, they are merely different." A new voice cut through the chamber. "Different how?" Commander Yilrix of the Sithari stepped forward, her body sleek and graceful, her dark eyes fixed on Thalrex with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. She had not been part of the expedition. She had been assigned to the Council's research division, studying humanity's cultural records. "The humans," Yilrix said, "are not a species that can be understood through military analysis. Their history reveals patterns that we have never encountered. They are a species that has fought itself for its entire existence. They have developed weapons designed to kill each other, strategies designed to defeat each other, philosophies designed to justify killing each other. And then, in less than 500 standard cycles, they somehow integrated all of that destructive capacity into a single unified civilization." Thalrex nodded. "Yes, we have observed this. It is remarkable but not unique. Several species in Council history have." "It is absolutely unique," Yilrix interrupted. "Every species we have encountered developed a unified civilization before they developed weapons capable of destroying their own worlds. The Vorkath achieved unity through biological imperative. The Hethnar achieved unity through intellectual consensus. The Sithari achieved unity through empathic connection. But the humans achieved unity through something else entirely." She paused, her sensory organs flickering with emotion that Thalrex could not read. "They achieved unity through the acceptance of violence. They did not eliminate their capacity for conflict, they turned it outward. They weaponized their own internal divisions and aimed them at the external universe. They are not a single species. They are a species of species. Each human is an individual with its own motivations, its own fears, its own desires. And yet they can coordinate with each other with a speed that our tactical computers cannot match. They make decisions in combat that have no basis in established military doctrine. They improvise, they adapt, they sacrifice. The humans have been like this for their entire existence," Yilrix concluded. "They have spent their history killing each other, and now they have turned their attention to us." The Council chamber erupted into chaos. Arguments, accusations, demands for more data. Yilrik stood calmly in the center of the storm, watching the other species react with the detachment of a scholar observing a laboratory experiment. Finally, the Hethnar ambassador called for order. "You are suggesting," he said, "that the humans are, what? Inherently more warlike than other species, that they pose an existential threat to the Council." "I am suggesting," Yilrix replied, "that we have never encountered a species like humanity. Every species we have absorbed into the Council has been willing to accept the benefits of association. The humans are different. They do not want our benefits. They want our absence." Thalrex stepped forward, his voice rising. "That is defeatism. We can defeat them. We simply need to adjust our tactics, develop new strategies." "Commander Thalrex," Yilrix said, "the humans' prisoner interrogation revealed something disturbing. They do not fight to win. They fight to punish. They fight to make the cost of victory so high that no opponent will ever consider attacking them again." She turned to face the full assembly. "We can destroy their fleet. We can bomb their worlds. We can kill every human in the galaxy, but they will not surrender. They will not negotiate. They will fight until there are no humans left to fight. And then, in the final moment of their extinction, they will ensure that we remember them." "I recommend we reconsider our strategy," Yilrix concluded. "Not because we cannot defeat them, but because the cost of victory is too high." The council chamber fell silent again. For the first time in its 6,000-year history, the Galactic Council faced an opponent that was not afraid of them. And in the darkness between the stars, Admiral Vance watched the Council's fleet retreat and began to plan the next phase of human strategy. He had not expected the Council to surrender. He had expected them to fight. And he had prepared for that eventuality with the same ruthless precision that had allowed humanity to survive its own history of self-destruction. The humans were not perfect. They were not invincible, but they understood something that the Council had never learned. Sometimes the only way to win a war is to make your enemy afraid to continue fighting. The second wave came from a direction the Council had not anticipated. Human ships appeared at the Vega Gate, the Rigel Gate, the Aldebaran Gate. Not the full Terran fleet. That would have been impossible, given their limited resources, but enough vessels to cripple the gate network. They did not try to capture the gates. They simply disabled the control nodes, the relay stations, the communication arrays that made interstellar travel possible. The Council's logistical network began to fail. Supply ships could no longer reach distant outposts. Military reinforcements could not be dispatched to threatened systems. The political structure, so carefully maintained for 6,000 years, started to show cracks. Commander Thalrex received the news in a private chamber, away from the chaos of the full Council. His tactical officers had prepared a detailed analysis of human strategic capabilities. The report was devastating. "They are not trying to conquer our territory," Thalrex murmured. "They are trying to isolate us. They are trying to reduce our species to individual planets, unable to coordinate, unable to defend each other." His executive officer nodded grimly. "They are also targeting specific species. The Vorkath, the Hethnar, the Sithari. They are striking our home systems. They are not attacking Council worlds randomly. They are attacking the political structure of the Council itself." Thalrex closed his eyes. The humans had studied Council politics. They had identified the most powerful members, the ones whose support was essential to maintaining the alliance, and they had systematically targeted them. "They are trying to break us," Thalrex said. "They do not need to defeat the Council militarily. They simply need to destroy our ability to function as a coherent entity." The strategy was elegant, it was efficient, it was also terrifying. Because it demonstrated that the humans understood the Council's political structure better than the Council's own leadership did. "Commander," the executive officer said, "there is more. The human leader, Admiral Vance, has requested a new transmission. He wants to address the Council directly." Thalrex felt a chill run through his body. What does he want? He wants to discuss terms. The council chamber was packed when Vance's image appeared on the main display. The human admiral looked tired. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his uniform was rumpled, but his voice carried the same steady certainty that had marked his first transmission. "Members of the Galactic Council," he said, "we have been at war for 43 standard days. In that time, you have lost 1/5 of your military fleet, 3/4 of your logistical support capacity, and the ability to maintain secure communication across your interstellar network. Our losses have been significant as well. We have lost ships, crews, and resources that we cannot replace quickly." He paused. "You have two options. You can continue to prosecute this war. You can mobilize your remaining forces, commit to a full-scale offensive, and attempt to destroy humanity's capacity to resist. If you choose this option, I will not pretend that it would fail. You still possess overwhelming numerical superiority. You could eventually win the war, though it would cost you more than you are willing to pay. Or," he continued, "you can accept that humanity will not be controlled, will not be intimidated, and will not be pacified. You can negotiate a settlement that recognizes our right to exist without council oversight." Ambassador Zarek rose, his voice trembling. "You are demanding that we surrender." "I am demanding that you acknowledge reality," Vance replied. "The Council has existed for 6,000 years. It has absorbed dozens of species, integrated them into its political structure, established itself as the dominant power in this galaxy. That era is over. Not because we are stronger than you, not because we are smarter than you, but because we are not afraid to die for our freedom." The chamber erupted into chaos again. Some species called for immediate capitulation. Others demanded that the war continue. A few simply stared at the human admiral's image with expressions of terror. Vance waited for the noise to subside. "I will give you 100 standard hours to make your decision. If the answer is war, we will continue to fight until we are no longer capable of fighting. If the answer is peace, we will expect a formal proposal that reflects the reality of our new relationship." His image vanished. The council chamber fell silent, and for the first time in its history, the Galactic Council had no idea what to do. Commander Yilrix watched the human admiral's image fade and felt a strange emotion stirring in her chest. It was not fear. It was not anger. It was something else, something she had never experienced before. Respect. The humans had not won the war. They had not achieved military victory, but they had achieved something that the Council had never believed possible. They had forced the Council to take them seriously. And in the darkness between the stars, Admiral Vance sat on the bridge of his damaged flagship and allowed himself a rare moment of rest. His crew was exhausted. His fleet was depleted. His supplies were running low. But the Council had been shaken. They had been forced to reconsider their assumptions. And that, Vance knew, was the first step toward victory. Yilrix had spent 10 days in the human research facility, studying the archives, interviewing the prisoners, trying to understand. She had not been permitted to leave. The humans had made that clear. She was a prisoner of war, entitled to basic protections but not to freedom. She had accepted that condition without complaint. It gave her time to study, to observe, to learn. The research facility was not a prison camp. It was a converted government building on one of Earth's larger colonies, a world that had been terraformed 3 centuries earlier by humans who had never met an alien species. The humans treated her with something approaching respect, not the servility of a conquered species, not the fear of a primitive creature, but the grudging acknowledgement of an opponent who had earned their attention. Yilrix spent her days reviewing human historical records. What she found disturbed her. Humans had not evolved in isolation. They had evolved in competition, not just with other species, but with themselves. Their history was a continuous series of wars, genocides, and attempted genocides, punctuated by brief periods of peace. They had created weapons capable of destroying their entire world, and had used them. They had developed ideologies that justified mass murder, and had embraced them. They had built governments that oppressed their own populations and had overthrown them. And yet somehow they had survived. They had thrived. They had reached the stars with more moral complexity than any species the Council had ever encountered. How? Yilrix asked her human guard, a young officer named Miranda. How did your species survive its own history? Miranda shrugged. We learned, eventually. We made mistakes, paid for them, learned not to make them again. It took a long time, but we got there. Yilrix shook her head. That doesn't make sense. Other species would have destroyed themselves long before they reached that point. The Vorkath have a history of violence as well, not as extreme as yours, but similar. They never progressed beyond their own internal conflicts. How did you? Miranda considered the question. Maybe we didn't. Maybe we just got better at directing our violence outward instead of inward. When we stopped fighting each other, we had to find someone else to fight. And when we found you. She shrugged again. Well, here we are. Yilrix understood. The humans had not evolved beyond their violent nature. They had merely redirected it. The same instincts that had driven them to destroy their own species were now driving them to destroy the Council. But there was something else, too. Something that Yilrix had not fully understood until she saw the human prisoners interacting with each other. They were brutal to their enemies. She had seen the battle footage, seen the rage and fury in their eyes, but they were gentle with each other. They showed compassion, loyalty, and something that Yilrix's species had evolved to recognize but had never fully understood. Love. The humans fought for each other, not for abstract ideals like honor or duty, though those words were certainly part of their vocabulary. They fought for their families, their friends, their neighbors. They fought because they had something worth protecting. And that, Yilrix realized, was the key to understanding them. Commander Yilrix, her guard said, Admiral Vance has requested your presence. He wants to speak with you. Yilrix followed the guard through the facility, her mind racing. She had met the human admiral only once before, during the initial battle when her ship had been captured. He had seemed cold, distant, emotionless. She had assumed it was a mask, a psychological defense. She was wrong. Vance met her in a small office, its walls covered with images of human faces. Family, Yilrix realized. They were images of his family. You wanted to see me, she said. Vance nodded. I want you to understand something. We are not your enemy. Yilrix stared at him. You have killed thousands of my people. You have destroyed our ships, our supplies, our ability to defend ourselves. How can you say that? Vance's expression remained unchanged. We have killed your people because your people attacked us first. We have destroyed your supplies because they were being used to attack us. We have done what any species would do in our position, defended ourselves. He paused. I don't want to destroy you. I don't want to conquer you. I want you to leave us alone. We want to exist in this universe without fearing that someone will come to take our freedom, our worlds, our dignity. Yilrix considered this. And if we accept your terms, what then? Vance smiled, a genuine smile, not the predatory expression she had expected. Then we find a way to coexist. It won't be easy. We are not good at trust, but we have to start somewhere. Yilrix felt a strange sensation in her chest. It was not fear. It was not anger. It was hope. The second ultimatum arrived on the same channel as the first. Admiral Vance's image appeared in the council chamber, but this time there was no defiance in his expression. There was no anger, no threat, no demand for surrender. He simply looked tired. Members of the Galactic Council, he said, we have achieved a stalemate. Neither side can win this war without suffering unacceptable losses. I am proposing an end to hostilities. Ambassador Zorak rose, his voice barely containing his excitement. You are proposing surrender. Vance shook his head. No, I am proposing negotiation. We will agree to a formal peace treaty. We will accept certain limitations on our military expansion. We will join your community of species, not as a subordinate but as an equal. The chamber erupted into chaos. Some species accepted the proposal immediately. They had been advocating for peace since the beginning. Others, especially the Vorkath, demanded that the war continue. Commander Thalrex, his body damaged and his confidence shattered, argued that this was a human trick. "They are trying to divide us," Thalrex shouted. "They are trying to take advantage of our weakness. If we accept their terms, they will continue to expand, continue to threaten, continue to—" "Enough," Ylrix said, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Commander Thalrex, we have lost this war. We cannot defeat the humans. We can only destroy ourselves trying." She turned to face the full assembly. "I have studied humanity. I have seen what they can do, and I have seen why they are fighting." She paused, her eyes sweeping across the chamber. "The humans are not fighting to conquer us. They are fighting to protect themselves. They are fighting because they believe that their existence matters, and they are right." Zorek stepped forward. "What are you suggesting?" "I am suggesting," Ylrix said, "that we accept the human proposal. We negotiate a peace treaty. We recognize their right to exist. We establish a new relationship with their species." "And if we refuse," Thalrex demanded. "Then they will continue to fight," Ylrix replied. "And we will continue to lose, not because we are weaker, but because they are willing to sacrifice everything and we are not." The vote was called. The proposal passed by a narrow margin. The Council would negotiate with humanity, would recognize their sovereignty, would begin the process of integration. Admiral Vance received the news in his office on Earth. His crew surrounded him, cheering, celebrating. He allowed himself a small smile. The war was over. The Council had accepted the terms of peace. But Vance knew that the real work was just beginning. The humans would have to learn how to live in a galaxy that had tried to destroy them. The Council would have to learn how to accept a species that had refused to be controlled. It would not be easy. There would be setbacks, conflicts, and moments when both sides wondered if the war had been worth it. But the humans had survived their own history of self-destruction. They could survive this, too. 50 standard cycles after the peace treaty was signed, a human child stood on the observation deck of a council station and watched the stars. Her name was Myra, and she was 12 years old. She had been born in the new era, the era of cooperation, of integration, of mutual respect. She had never known war. She had never known fear. She had never known the hatred that had driven her species to fight the Galactic Council. But she knew her history. Her parents had taught her. Her teachers had taught her. The archives were full of stories about the war, the great battle at the Proxima Gate, the destruction of the Council's supply ships, the desperate struggle for survival. And she knew that her species had won, not through superior technology, not through superior numbers, but through superior will. The humans had refused to submit. They had refused to surrender. They had refused to accept that their existence was less important than the Council's ambitions. And now, 50 cycles later, the Council was different. The Vorkath had learned to respect their former enemies. The Hethnar had integrated human science into their own traditions. The Sithari had adopted human emotional awareness into their empathic culture. The humans had changed the galaxy. Myra watched the stars and wondered what the future would bring. Her species was still young, still learning, still making mistakes, but they had proven themselves capable of surviving even the worst threats. She smiled, turned away from the viewport, and went to join her friends. The war was over, the peace had begun, and humanity was still standing.